You do not survive a war by being loud. You survive it by being invisible, by learning how to disappear into a room, a job, a life, until nobody thinks to look twice at you. And for 6 years, the only thing Dana Cole flew was a fuel truck. She drove it in slow, careful loops around the flight line at Cedar Hollow Regional, an airport so small it did not even keep a control tower shift running after 6 in the evening. Nobody there knew she had once carried a call sign. Nobody knew that the quiet woman in oil-stained coveralls, the one who never talked about herself, had spent 4 tours flying combat sorties most of them could not have located on a map if their lives depended on it. She liked it that way. Quiet. Small. Forgettable. A life with no altitude to lose. Until the Saturday of the Cedar Hollow Air Show, when a vintage jet trainer lost its hydraulics 11,000 feet over the crowd, and the only person on the ground who actually knew how to bring it down alive was the woman nobody had bothered to ask. Before we go further, seriously, drop that comment, hit subscribe, and tap that like button right now. It only takes a second, and it tells me you want more stories exactly like this one. Okay, let us go back to the very beginning, to a Tuesday morning 3 years before any of this happened, when a fuel truck job at a county airport looked like the smallest, safest life a person could possibly choose, and nobody, least of all Dana, thought that would ever change again. Cedar Hollow was not much to look at most days. A single strip of cracked asphalt, a windsock that had seen better decades, and a hangar with a roof that groaned every time the wind picked up out of the west. But on Air Show weekend, the little airport transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Food trucks lined the access road. Kids pressed sticky hands against chain-link fences to watch biplanes carve smoke trails across a cloudless June sky. And the whole place smelled like funnel cake and 100 low-lead avgas. Dana had been up since 4 in the morning, same as every show day, checking fuel lines and topping off the aerobatic performers' tanks with the same methodical calm she brought to everything she touched. Her hands moved on instinct now. Crack the cap, check the color, smell for water contamination, replace the cap, mark the log in neat block letters. She did not need to think about any of it anymore. Thinking was reserved for things that still scared her, and none of this qualified. What did still catch her sometimes was the sound of jet engines spooling up close, that particular whine climbing into a shriek. It brought a tightness behind her sternum she never mentioned to anyone. An old ache in her left shoulder, too, where a piece of shrapnel had lived for 4 years before surgeons finally chased it out for good. She rolled the shoulder now, out of pure habit, and looked up as a red and white Air OL 39 taxied past, canopy catching the morning sun like a struck match. She knew that airframe. She knew it better, in fact, than the man about to strap into it did, down to the exact feel of its trim wheel and the particular groan its canopy made on a humid morning like this one, a sound she had not expected to still recognize after all these years. His name was Rick Danvers, and he had bought the L-39 Albatros 3 years earlier with money from selling a chain of car dealerships across 2 counties. He called himself a warbird pilot on his glossy air show flyers, though the only combat he had ever actually seen was rendered in high definition on a home flight simulator rig in his garage. He was good enough to loop and roll cleanly for a paying crowd, but good enough for that was an entirely different animal from good enough for what was quietly coming his way that afternoon. Dana clocked him the way she clocked every pilot who crossed her fuel line, not by his swagger, but by his hands. Danvers gripped his coffee cup too tight, knuckles pale, and his eyes kept sliding toward the growing crowd instead of toward his own aircraft during pre-flight. A man performing for people, she thought, not flying for the airplane itself. She filed the observation away the way she filed away nearly everything now, without comment, and went back to her fuel line without a word. Above her, unnoticed by the crowd, a single hawk circled the field on a rising thermal, patient and unhurried, the way she tried to be. In her locker at the far edge of the hangar, tucked behind a stack of oil filters nobody ever bothered to move, sat a battered green footlocker she had not opened in over a year. Inside it, a folded flight suit with a patch she had carefully unstitched herself, dog tags gone dull and soft with age, and one photograph of 6 people standing in front of an F-15E, all of them grinning at whoever held the camera, only 2 of them still alive today. She kept the locker locked. She kept most of herself locked, too. It had always been easier that way, and easier had felt for a long time like enough, right up until the moment it stopped feeling like enough at all. Cole, fuel truck to the flight line. We've got the L-39 topping off at 11. It was already turning into a bright, ordinary sort of morning. The voice belonged to Hank Alvarez, Cedar Hollow's grizzled operations manager, and the closest thing Dana had to a real friend at the airport. He was the only one who had ever asked, once, gently, about the thin scar along her collarbone, and the only one who had taken her silence as a full answer and never asked again. "Copy," she called back, already moving toward the truck, boots crunching gravel. The show announcer's voice crackled over the PA system, warming the crowd up with practiced, syrupy enthusiasm, promising death-defying stunts and heart-stopping maneuvers all afternoon long. Somewhere past the perimeter fence, a cluster of Air Force RTC cadets stood at loose parade rest near a static display aircraft, and Dana felt the old pull of the uniform even now, 6 years and 1 honorable discharge later, a pull she had learned to acknowledge and then quietly set down. She did not miss the war itself. What she missed was the precision. The way a good mission ran like one long-held breath, every variable accounted for in advance. Every risk calculated down to the decimal point. No room left over for ego or unnecessary noise. Civilian aviation, especially airshow aviation, ran on an entirely different fuel. Adrenaline. Applause. Danvers's name printed in bold on a sponsor banner. She topped off his tanks, checked his fuel caps twice out of pure habit, and stepped back as he climbed into the cockpit, utterly oblivious to the woman who had just handled his aircraft with more care than his own paid crew chief ever did. It was a small thing, that kind of care. It always had been, in her experience, the small things that kept people alive long after the applause had faded and everyone had gone home. The crowd had settled into folding chairs by then, sunscreen and lemonade in hand, expecting nothing more than a pleasant afternoon of noise and color. By 10:45, the L-39 was 30 minutes into its display, and it was, Dana had to grudgingly admit, a genuinely decent show. Danvers rolled cleanly through a loop, a barrel roll, a low pass that had the crowd gasping and clapping in unison. She watched from a fuel truck's cab with half an eye, the other half buried in paperwork, when something in the engine note shifted, almost too subtle to register. A half-second stutter in the pitch, gone again as fast as it came. Most people would not have caught it at all over the PA system and the noise of 5,000 people talking at once. Dana's spine straightened before her conscious mind had even finished processing the sound, the reaction living somewhere below thought. She had heard that exact stutter before. Twice, in fact, once in a simulator during initial training, and once for real over a stretch of hostile desert 11 years earlier, in the long seconds before a hydraulic pump in her own jet had begun, quietly and irreversibly, to die on her, far from any runway at all. She set her clipboard down without thinking, some part of her already off the clock and back on duty. She stepped out of the truck cab, eyes fixed on the L-39 as it climbed into another pass. The jet's flight path wobbled just slightly, a half-degree correction that should not have been necessary in air this smooth. Danvers was fighting something up there, something new, and from the ground, in the brief hush of a crowd that had not noticed yet, Dana Cole felt 6 careful years of invisibility begin, quietly, to crack straight down the middle, a sound only she could hear over the noise of the crowd around her, and one she had spent a long time hoping never to hear again. "Tower, Warbird 1, I got a problem." Danvers's voice came scratchy and thin through the field radio speakers bolted near the hangar wall, every trace of his practiced showman's confidence gone out of it entirely. "Stick's getting heavy. Real heavy. I think I've lost hydraulics, maybe both systems." For 1 second, she stood frozen listening. Then Dana was already moving, cutting across the tarmac at a dead run, coveralls flapping around her legs, boots pounding cracked asphalt hard enough to sting. Around her, the entire show grounds shifted, all at once, from festival to fear in the space of a single breath. The PA announcer's voice faltered mid-sentence, then died out completely. Someone screamed near the fence line, sharp and sudden. A security guard grabbed a bullhorn and started pushing the crowd back, more out of raw instinct than any protocol he had actually trained for in his life. In the small operations trailer that doubled as Cedar Hollow's air traffic control on show days, a retired controller named Pete Grissom stared at his radar scope with his mouth slightly open, one hand already reaching for the phone to call the nearest real tower with jurisdiction. 40 miles out, far too far to help in time. Warbird 1, say your altitude and fuel state, Pete radioed, his voice cracking with the specific kind of panic that comes from running an emergency he was never once actually trained to run. His hand hovered over a phone line that would take too long to matter. 11,000, fuel's fine, it's not fuel, it's the stick, I've got maybe rudder and throttle, and that's it. Somebody give me a real pilot on this radio right now. The transmission cut out for a half second, swallowed by static, before crackling back in, thinner and more afraid than before. The words hit the flight line like a slap, as if the 50 or so people scrambling around the tiny operations trailer were somehow all pretending, all lesser, not what this moment required. Randall Voss, the air show's director, a barrel-chested man in a bright polo shirt who had spent the morning shaking hands with sponsors and posing for photographs, burst into the trailer already shouting orders nobody could execute. Call the Air National Guard base. Call anybody. We need an actual military pilot on this channel before that thing comes down on top of my crowd. His pen had rolled off the console, and neither man had noticed. There's nobody like that here, Randall, Pete said, hands visibly shaking over his console. It's an air show. We've got aerobatic performers, we've got ground crew. We don't have combat pilots just standing around waiting for something like this to happen. Outside the trailer, Dana Cole arrived at a full sprint, chest heaving, and reached for the door handle without breaking stride. Somewhere above them, the red and white jet banked again, its silhouette smaller and further away than anyone standing on the ground wanted it to be. Voss caught the motion and blocked her without even looking at her properly. His eyes locked on the sky where a red and white speck banked unsteadily against the blue. Not now. We need a professional in here, not maintenance. He said it fast, dismissive, already turning away. The words tossed over his shoulder like scraps thrown to a dog that had wandered too close, not even worth a second glance. Dana did not flinch, and she did not argue. She did not have the years left in her for arguing with men like Voss anymore. She just planted her boots on the tarmac and said, quietly but clearly, I flew 15s for 11 years, combat rated for tours. Give me the mic. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Voss did not even pause to consider it. Lady, this isn't the time for jokes. Get out of the trailer now. He turned his back on her fully, already reaching for the radio himself. A man who had never in his life flown anything faster than a rental car about to try talking a dying pilot through a hydraulic failure at 11,000 feet over his own paying crowd. For a long moment, nobody in the trailer moved at all, or spoke, or even seemed to breathe. It might have ended right there, might have been Voss's fumbling, panic voice on that radio, and a very different, much darker outcome waiting 11 long minutes later for everyone standing on that field. But behind the operations trailer, wheeling his cart of spare radio batteries toward the door, an old crew chief named Walt Prentice stopped dead in his tracks, cart rolling to a slow stop beside him. Walt had put in 31 long years in the Air Force before he finally retired to a quiet job fixing headsets at a regional airport nobody outside the county had ever heard of, and he had a sharp memory for faces that had never once in 3 decades failed him. He looked hard at the woman in oil-streaked coveralls standing outside the trailer door, jaw set tight, eyes locked steady on the sky above, and something clicked into place that had been sitting unrecognized in the back of his mind for the better part of 8 months. He stepped past Voss without so much as asking anyone's permission at all, leaned in close to Pete Grissom's ear, and said 4 quiet, certain words, pitched low enough that only the controller could hear them clearly over the noise. That's Vesper. Let her talk. He said it the way a man states a fact he has waited a very long time to say out loud, certain of it down to his bones. Pete Grissom's head snapped up fast enough that his headset nearly slid off. He had not heard that call sign spoken aloud in years. Not since a briefing room slideshow at a conference he had attended back when he still wore the uniform himself. A case study on a rescue gone right when every projection on the board said it should have gone catastrophically wrong. Vesper, the pilot who had flown a crippled F-15E 400 miles on a wing in a prayer rather than eject over hostile territory, because ejecting would have meant abandoning two pararescuemen strapped in her back seat, unconscious and unable to save themselves. He had never once connected the legend to an actual face. Now, staring at a fuel truck driver in stained coveralls, he suddenly did, completely and all at once. The way a puzzle piece finally clicks into a picture you didn't know you were looking at. "Ma'am," Pete said, voice unsteady. "Is that true? Are you?" Somewhere above them, the jet's engine note wavered again, and every head in the trailer turned upward at once. "I'm the only one here who's actually flown an emergency hydraulics out procedure for real," Dana said, cutting straight through the question without bothering to confirm or deny the name Walt had just whispered. "Give me the radio. Now." Every second we spend standing here arguing is a second he's up there guessing at the numbers. Voss opened his mouth to object one more time, but Walt Prentice put a flat hand against his chest, an old crew chief gesture that had stopped bar fights and worse things over 31 years of service. A gesture that still worked even now, retired. "Randall, let her talk to that boy before you get somebody killed over your pride." Pete shoved the microphone into Dana's hand before Voss could even manage to form another word, his own fingers trembling slightly as he let it go. The trailer had gone completely silent, every eye on her. Dana closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, just long enough to feel the old shape of it settle back over her like a familiar jacket, the specific calm that used to live permanently in her chest every single time the world went sideways at altitude. Then she keyed the mic without a trace of hesitation, and her voice came out flat, level, utterly unhurried, the voice of someone who had done this exact kind of talking before, more than once, when the stakes were considerably higher than a county air show crowd on a Saturday afternoon. "Warbird 1, this is ground. Do you copy?" Cole speaking, listen close. "I flew 15s, 11 years, combat rated, 4 tours. I've handled a hydraulics out emergency before, for real, not in a simulator somewhere. I'm going to walk you through this step by step. First thing, breathe. You're flying the jet. The jet is not flying you. Confirm your current airspeed and configuration for me." Static hissed once across the open channel, then cleared. There was a beat of pure silence. Then Danvers's voice again, thinner than before, but noticeably steadier already, the way a panicking pilot's voice always steadies the instant someone competent finally starts talking to them, like a professional instead of a victim. 210 knots. Gear up, flaps up. Stick's got maybe 20% authority left. I think it's bleeding out fast, faster than I'd like. Copy that. Good work staying level. You've still got rudder and throttle, which means you've still got a flyable airplane, not a falling rock with wings. I need you to trim for level flight using throttle inputs alone and confirm your fuel state one more time for me, exactly as it reads. Somewhere behind her, she heard Voss finally, quietly, stop talking. Nobody in the bleachers reached for their phones anymore. On the ground, the crowd had gone eerily quiet. 5,000 people watching a small red jet circle unsteadily against a sky that had gone from festival blue to something closer to hell breath. Voss stood frozen near the trailer door, his earlier objection dead in his throat now, staring at the woman he had dismissed 90 seconds earlier as though she had somehow sprouted a second head in front of him. Inside the cockpit, Rick Danvers gripped the stick with both hands, sweat running cold down inside his flight suit. The L-39's nose wandering a half-degree left, then right, every correction sluggish and badly delayed through what little hydraulic pressure still remained in the lines. He had flown this exact jet for 200 hours. None of those hours had prepared him for this particular afternoon. The jet banked wide over a stand of pines at the edge of the property, a slow, careful arc. "I've got about 1,800 pounds of fuel," he radioed, voice tight and clipped. "Maybe 40 minutes if I'm careful with it. What I do next?" You're going to burn some of that down before we bring you in, Dana said, calm as still water on a windless morning. Landing heavy with degraded hydraulics on a runway this short is exactly how people die out here. We're going to fly a wide holding pattern, get you comfortable flying on rudder and throttle alone, and get your gear down using the emergency pneumatic system while you've still got altitude left to recover from a bad extension. Confirm you have an emergency gear blowdown bottle on board. Confirming, yeah. Yeah, I've got it. Never once had to actually use it before today. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Dana let it pass without comment. She kept her tone light, deliberately, the way a good instructor always did. Nobody ever has until the exact day they need it, Dana said. That's fine. That's completely normal. I'm going to talk you through it step by step, and you're going to do exactly what I say in the order I say it and nothing else beyond that. Not because you're not capable, but because task saturation kills pilots faster than mechanical failure ever does, and right now your only job in the world is to fly the airplane and listen to my voice. Nobody in the trailer said a word while she worked. Nobody in the trailer said a word while she worked. Beside the radio, Walt Prentice watched the woman he had once seen in a grainy briefing photograph, now standing in a fuel-stained jumpsuit with a borrowed headset pressed to one ear, running a full emergency procedure with the unhurried precision of someone reciting a simple grocery list to a neighbor. He had coordinated search and rescue operations for 3 full decades of his career. He knew exactly what he was watching unfold in front of him, and it made the hair on his forearms stand straight up. Walt, Pete Grissom whispered, not taking his eyes off the radar scope for even a second. Who is she, really? What am I looking at right now? Captain Dana Cole, call sign Vesper, Walt said quietly, almost reverently. 4 combat tours, F-15E Strike Eagle, single seat and dual configurations both. There's a rescue story with her name attached to it that they still teach at survival school to this day. I never once thought I'd see her driving a fuel truck at some county air show in the middle of nowhere. He paused, watching her. I don't think she wanted anyone here to ever know. Pete said nothing back. There was nothing to say that would not sound small next to what he was hearing. The sun had climbed higher now, hard and white overhead, throwing short shadows across the tarmac below and glinting off the fire truck's chrome. Overhead, the L-39 leveled slowly into a wide, careful circuit, Danvers following each instruction with the jerky precision of a man concentrating harder than he had ever concentrated in his entire life. Dana talked him through burning fuel in a slow holding pattern, monitoring his airspeed calls one at a time, correcting his bank angle purely by ear, listening hard to the engine note for any sign of second failure, stacking on top of the first one. Your instinct is going to be to fight the stick every time it feels heavy, she told him, voice steady and never rising. Don't do that. Trust the trim, trust the throttle, and let the airplane settle into whatever it naturally wants to do. You're not wrestling some wild animal up there today. You're negotiating calmly with a tired one. Copy, Danvers said, breathing out slow, and for the first time in 11 long minutes, there was something almost like a laugh buried in his voice, thin and disbelieving. Who taught you to talk like that? Calm as a Sunday morning. 4 tours and one very good instructor pilot who never once believed in raising his voice at a student, Dana said. Focus now. Stay with me. Give me your current fuel state, exact number. 1,100 pounds remaining. Good. That gives us margin to work with. We're bringing you in now. I need you to reach down with your right hand and find the emergency gear extension handle. It should be a yellow T-handle, lower right side of the main panel. Don't pull it yet. Just find it and confirm your hand is actually on it. She kept her eyes on the small red shape circling against the sky the entire time she spoke. Somewhere behind the fence, a mother pulled her son back from the rail, her eyes fixed on the sky instead of him for the first time all morning, one hand pressed flat against her own chest. Down on the tarmac, emergency vehicles had finally arrived, 2 fire trucks and an ambulance rolling in a staggered position along the runway's edge, lights spinning uselessly bright against the flat glare of the noon sun. Voss stood beside the operations trailer now, arms crossed tight against his chest, saying absolutely nothing, watching a woman he had personally ordered off the premises less than 15 minutes earlier single-handedly hold together an emergency his entire train show staff had no real idea how to manage on their own. Hank Alvarez arrived at a dead jog, breathless, having heard the commotion carry from the far end of the flight line. He took one long look at Dana, standing at the radio, headset pressed tight to her ear, voice level as a held musical note, and understood immediately that he was watching a version of his quiet, unassuming fuel truck driver he had never once glimpsed in 3 full years of working beside her every single day. "Got it," Danvers radioed, breathless and shaking. "Hands on the handle now." "Good. Pull it now, firm and steady, all the way to the stop position. You'll feel and hear the gear drop free. It's going to be loud, and it's going to feel wrong because there's no hydraulic cushioning left to soften it. That's completely normal. Confirm 3 green lights on your gear panel the moment it settles down." A pause. The faint whine of pneumatic pressure crackling through the open radio channel. Then, 3 green. "I got 3 green lights, gears down and locked in position." A ragged cheer went up somewhere behind the fence line, quickly hushed. "Good work," Dana said, and meant every word of it, the same 2 words she had said to 24 frightened aircrew over the years, in moments considerably worse than this particular Saturday afternoon. "You just did the single hardest part of this whole thing. Everything left from here is just flying one slow, careful approach and trusting exactly what I tell you. Nothing more." The jet completed one more slow lap of the pattern, fuel gauge ticking steadily downward. She turned to Pete Grissom without ever lowering the mic from her mouth. "I need the runway cleared completely, foam trucks positioned but kept well off the active surface, and every non-essential vehicle pulled back at least 200 meters. He's coming in with degraded control authority and a fixed gear he cannot retract if he needs to go around for any reason. We get exactly 1 real shot at this landing." Pete relayed the instructions in a voice that had finally found its footing again, borrowing Dana's calm the way a struggling swimmer borrows a strong, steady current to pull himself along. Emergency crews repositioned fast. The crowd, still and silent now behind the fence line, watched the small red jet bank onto a long, wide final approach, wings rocking slightly with every small correction Danvers fed through the throttle alone. "Talk to me about the landing itself," Danvers said, voice tightening again as the runway grew larger and closer in his windscreen. "Heavy jet, degraded stick, short strip. I don't love my odds here, honestly." "You don't need to love them," Dana said evenly. "You just need to fly the exact numbers I give you. Airspeed 140 over the fence, no lower than that. We're not stretching this glide for anybody." Somewhere behind her, she heard Hank exhale like he had been holding it for an hour. Every eye on the ground tracked the same small shape now, the entire airport reduced to one thin red line against the sky. The L-39 dropped steadily through 800 feet, then 500, its nose wandering with every small gust of crosswind that caught the fuselage broadside, Danvers correcting late and rough through what little remained of his hydraulic authority. Dana watched the aircraft silhouette against the pale sky and read its behavior the exact way she had once read every aircraft she had ever flown herself, not through instruments she could not even see from the ground, but through the shape of its motion, the rhythm of its wobble, the whole quiet story its flight path told her. "You're drifting right as centerline," she said, steady as ever. "Small rudder input only, don't overcorrect on me now. Throttle back 2%. You've got this, you're doing fine. 300 feet. 200 feet. The crowd behind the fence held a silence so total and complete that the jet's engine note seemed to fill the entire sky by itself. A low mechanical moan underscored by the thin, tight sound of a pilot breathing hard into an open microphone channel. 140, Danvers called out, voice cracking under the strain. 140 over the fence, holding it. Hold it right there. Runway's yours now. Fly it onto the numbers. Don't flare hard at the bottom. Let the mains touch down first and ride it out from there. You're not trying to grease this landing today. You're going to survive it. That's the only job on the schedule right now. The L-39's wheels crossed the threshold 6 feet above the tarmac, wobbling once, then twice. Danvers's hands white-knuckled around a stick that barely answered his inputs anymore at all. Dana watched without blinking, counting the seconds the way she had once counted them for a living. Nobody breathed. The mains touched down hard, a sharp bark of rubber and smoke against sun-bleached asphalt. The jet's nose dropping fast without any hydraulic cushioning left to soften the transition. For one terrible, stretched-out half-second, the aircraft seemed to porpoise, its nose bouncing skyward again unexpectedly, and a collective gasp rose up from behind the fence line, loud enough to carry clean over the engine noise itself, a single sharp sound across the whole field. "Stay off the brakes," Dana said, sharp now, for the only time in 11 full minutes of radio traffic, the words snapping out fast. "Let it settle on its own weight. Fight the urge to correct hard. Small inputs only, nothing dramatic." Danvers obeyed instantly, hands trembling badly against the stick, breath ragged in the mic. And the nose came down on the second touch, firm but controlled this time, tires screaming hard against the runway as the jet rolled out fast and long, eating up every remaining foot of Cedar Hollow short strip, while emergency vehicles paced it from both sides, lights strobing red and white against the harsh noon glare overhead. 600 feet from the runway's far end, with barely 200 feet of usable asphalt left to spare on either side, the L-39 finally rolled to a complete stop, engine winding down to a low idle, smoke from the hard touchdown drifting sideways across the tarmac in one thin gray curtain. For 3 full seconds, nobody on the ground made a single sound at all, the whole airfield frozen in place. Then, all together, the crowd behind the fence erupted, and somewhere inside the operations trailer, Pete Grissom finally exhaled a breath he felt like he had been holding for 11 straight, unbroken minutes, his hands still shaking hard against the console in front of him. For a moment, the whole operations trailer just watched the smoke drift, nobody quite ready to believe it yet. "Warbird 1, ground," Dana said into the mic, voice finally allowing itself the smallest edge of something warmer than pure calm. "You're down. You're safe now. Shut it down whenever you're ready. And take your time standing up afterward. Your legs are not going to want to cooperate with you for a minute or two." There was a long pause on the line before Danvers's answer came out. Half laugh, half sob, the particular sound a man who has just understood, all at once and completely, exactly how close he came that afternoon to never walking away from this field at all. "Copy that. Copy, thank you. Whoever you are out there, thank you so much." For one strange, suspended moment, the whole airfield seemed to hold perfectly still around the smoking jet. Fire crews swarmed the aircraft the instant it finished rolling, foam trucks flanking it on both sides though no fire had actually broken out, medics standing ready though Danvers climbed down the boarding ladder under his own power, legs shaking so badly he had to grip the fuselage for a long moment before he trusted himself enough to actually walk away from it. Dana set the radio microphone down gently on the console, the exact way she had always set it down after a mission that ended without a casualty report attached to it, and for one unguarded moment, standing alone in the sudden silence of the operations trailer, she let her shoulders finally drop from the rigid line they had held for 11 straight minutes without her even noticing. Then she became slowly, uncomfortably aware that every single person in the trailer was staring directly at her, in a silence that felt, somehow, louder than all the radio traffic had been. Nobody moved for a long moment after that. Randall Voss was the first to speak, and his voice had lost every last trace of the bark he had used to order her off the premises less than 20 minutes earlier. He kept glancing between her face and the empty sky, as if checking the two still matched. Walt said your name was Vesper, back there. That's a real call sign. That's a real thing people actually say about real combat pilots, not just anybody." "It was a long time ago now," Dana said quietly, already pulling the borrowed headset off her ear, already reaching for the door, the old instinct to simply disappear and go quiet kicking back in exactly the way it always did whenever a room started looking at her too closely for too long. 11 minutes ago, I told you to go help with crowd control," Voss said, and for a man used to talking over everyone around him, the words came out unusually quiet and small. I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. I had no idea. You couldn't have known that. Nobody could have, Dana said, without any real heat behind it, because she genuinely believed that to be true. Nobody could have known. That had always, quietly, been the entire point of the life she had built. Coveralls don't come with a service record printed anywhere on the back of them. Outside, across the tarmac, Rick Danvers had finally caught his breath enough to look up for where medics were checking his vitals, and his eyes found her through the open trailer door, the fuel truck driver, the woman he had never once bothered to even learn the name of in 3 full seasons of buying fuel from Cedar Hollow, the person who had just talked him down safely out of the sky itself, and who, until 11 minutes earlier, he could not have picked out of a small, ordinary crowd. The medics had wanted him to sit down. He hadn't listened. He crossed the tarmac at a walk that slowly turned into something closer to a stagger, medics trailing behind him with a blood pressure cuff still half attached to his forearm, and stopped 6 feet from Dana with the particular stunned expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about his own ordinary morning. His hands were still shaking faintly from adrenaline as he spoke. His hands were still shaking faintly from adrenaline as he spoke. You flew 15ths, he said. It was not really a question anymore by that point, more like a fact settling in. 11 years. For tours. Dana shrugged, the gesture small and well-practiced, the same shrug she used every single time someone got close enough to the truth to make her genuinely uncomfortable. It was a long time ago now. I fix fuel lines these days. He shook his head slowly, still catching his breath, hands braced on his knees. You just saved my life using the same calm voice you used to fix fuel lines, Danvers said. That's not a small thing you're casually describing there. Around them, the crowd that had watched 5,000 strong from behind the fence line had gone quiet in an entirely different way now. Word spreading fast through the gathered families and off-duty airmen and wide-eyed ROTC cadets that the fuel truck driver was the one who had actually talked the jet down safely. A visible ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turning in unison, phones slowly lowering, the particular reverent hush that settles over people who have just watched something they will find themselves describing for years afterward without ever quite finding the exact right words for it, the way you never quite can with the things that matter most. The crowd noise had dropped to almost nothing by then, a held collective breath. A few of the cadets had already begun to straighten their own posture without knowing quite why. Walt Prentice reached them first, moving with the unhurried authority of a man who had spent 3 full decades commanding respect without ever once needing to raise his voice to earn it. He walked slow and deliberate, the way a man walks when a moment deserves it, and stopped directly in front of Dana, doing something that made the entire flight line go completely still around them. He saluted her, full military bearing, hand snapped crisp to his brow. The exact gesture of one veteran to another that needed no explanation whatsoever to anyone who had ever worn a uniform, and needed absolutely no explanation at all to the dozen RTC cadets standing nearby, who straightened up instinctively at the sight of it. Some old instinct buried in their training recognizing the shape of respect even before their conscious minds had fully caught up with the reason behind it. Captain, Walt said, his voice steady. It's an honor. Dana stood frozen for one long moment, and used the sheer weight of that word aimed directly at her after 6 careful years of very deliberately making sure nobody ever aimed it at her at all. Then, slowly, she returned the salute, crisp and correct despite the fuel-stained coveralls, despite all the years in between, despite everything she had spent so long trying to quietly bury under an ordinary, unremarkable life. Thank you, Master Sergeant, she said quietly, reading his own faded patch without needing to ask him a single question about it. Behind them both, the crowd had gone utterly, reverently silent, watching a moment none of them had paid a ticket price to see, and all of them would remember longest. Somewhere behind her, the fair resumed its noise and fits and starts, food trucks and music easing back into the afternoon, as if the whole field were exhaling at once. The rest of that long afternoon passed in something of a blur, one Dana would only half remember clearly later. Reporters from the local paper trying to catch her for a quick quote she never quite gave them. Voss offering an apology, so long and stammering that she finally just shook his hand to make it stop entirely, Danvers insisting on buying her a drink at the hangar bar that evening, an offer she accepted mostly because refusing it felt more exhausting in the moment than simply agreeing. She did not tell them everything, not by a long stretch. She did not mention the 2 pararescuemen she had once refused to eject and abandon, or the 400 miles she had flown on a dying jet to get all 3 of them home safely, or the 8 long months of physical therapy that followed after, or the quiet decision she had made alone in a VA parking lot to walk away from the only life she had ever truly wanted rather than keep flying with a body that no longer fully cooperated with her. Some things simply were not meant for an airshow crowd. Some things belonged only to the people who had actually been there beside her. What she did do instead, as the sun dropped low and gold over Cedar Hollow's cracked runway, was walk back out to her fuel truck, climb into the familiar cab, and finish the exact route she had been running when the L-39's engine note first stuttered wrong 3 long hours earlier that same day. Hank found her out there, topping off a Cessna's tank with the same careful, unhurried hands she had used on every single aircraft that day, as if the last 3 hours had happened to somebody else entirely. The last of the crowd had drifted out through the gates by then, taillights strung out along the county road, the show banners already sagging in the evening air. "You didn't have to come back out here tonight," Hank said, leaning against the truck's fender, arms crossed loosely. "Whole airport's talking about you right now. You could easily take the rest of the day off. Nobody would blink." "Job's not done yet," Dana said simply, capping the tank, marking her log the exact way she always did, in the same neat handwriting she had once used to fill out mission reports from a cockpit at 30,000 feet. "Cessna 42 Bravos, flying out at 4. It needs fuel before then." Hank studied her for a long, quiet moment, the particular look of a man reassessing someone he had thought he already knew completely, top to bottom. "For what it's worth," he said finally, arms still crossed, "I always figured there was something in your past you just didn't talk about. Guess maybe a bad breakup, or losing somebody close to you. Never once guessed anything like this. Would it have changed anything if you had known?" Dana asked, still not looking up from her clipboard. "No," Hank admitted honestly. "You'd still be the best mechanic on this entire field, and I'd still trust you with every fuel line we've got out here. Guess today just proved I was right to all along." Dana allowed herself something close to a real, small smile then, tired around the edges but genuine, the same quiet expression she had worn walking away from a debrief 100 times before, in a different uniform, in a different life entirely. Then she climbed back into the truck and drove on toward the next aircraft, waiting patiently for its turn, logbook open on the seat beside her, exactly where it always sat. The airfield had gone quiet again, the way it always did, the way she had always liked it best, crickets starting up somewhere past the tree line. That evening, after the crowds finally thinned out and the food trucks packed up their generators for the night, with crickets starting up past the tree line, Walt Prentice found her alone by the hangar, wiping down her tools before locking up. He did not say much at first. He simply set something down on the workbench beside her hands, a small, worn patch, faded gold thread against dark fabric. The specific kind of patch pilots earned the hard way and almost never gave away to anyone else. "Survival school instructor patch," Walt said quietly. "Earned it the hard way myself, back when I still thought I had something left to prove to the world. Figured it belonged with somebody who actually understands what that particular thing really cost a person." He did not wait around for her to argue about it. He just nodded once, the same unhurried nod he had given 100 young aircrew members over 31 years of service, and walked back toward the parking lot, leaving her alone with the patch and the settling quiet. Dana turned it over once in her fingers, feeling the worn edges, the small imperfections left by decades of steady use. Then she set it gently down inside the green footlocker she had not opened in over a year, right beside the dog tags and the folded flight suit and the photograph of 5 people who used to, once, be 6 of them together. She did not lock it again that night. Some doors, once open for the right reason, simply did not need to stay shut anymore. She closed up the hangar, climbed into her truck, and drove home under a sky gone full dark and quiet above her, windows down, radio off, the whole world finally, mercifully still. Cedar Hollow went back to being Cedar Hollow. Mostly, in the weeks that followed, the fences repaired, the story slowly settling in a local legend. Dana Cole never once asked to be called Vesper again after that particular day. And mostly, people around Cedar Hollow respected it, though every so often a new hire would hear the story secondhand from Walt or Hank and look at their quiet, unassuming fuel truck driver with new eyes for a week or two before the ordinary rhythm of the flight line gently folded her back into the background she had always genuinely preferred living in. That was completely fine with her. She had spent 11 minutes being exactly who she used to be, and honestly, it had been enough for one lifetime. The rest of her days, she got to spend simply, quietly being herself, coveralls, fuel logs, and all, and there was a real peace in that she would not trade for anything. If this story hit you somewhere real tonight, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to show this story to somebody else out there who genuinely needs it tonight too. Drop a comment down below and tell me this honestly. If you were standing in that operations trailer and someone in oil-stained coveralls said, "Give me the radio," would you have trusted them right away, or would you have hesitated like Randall Voss did at first? I really want to know what you would have done. And if you have not already, go ahead and subscribe right now. There are a lot more hidden heroes waiting where this story came from, and I would genuinely love to have you here with us for the next one. Take care of each other out there, all of you. I will see you in the very next story. Until then, fly safe and be kind to the quiet people around you. You never quite know what they used to carry.